I am Lana, 32 years old, and until recently, I was the product development director at my father-in-law's company for 5 years. I had poured my heart and soul into creating a multi-million-dollar project that would revolutionize our industry. The relationship with my father-in-law Harold was always complicated, but nothing prepared me for that Tuesday morning when I walked into the boardroom to find my project being handed to Amber, an intern who had been with us for just 3 weeks. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever been blindsided by workplace betrayal. This story might just give you the courage to stand up for yourself. My journey at Reynolds Technology Solutions began 6 years ago when I was hired as a junior product analyst. Back then, I had no connection to the Reynolds family. I was simply a hardworking young professional with a master's degree in business and technology, eager to make my mark in the corporate world. The company was mid-sized, but growing rapidly, specializing in software solutions for healthcare systems. I quickly stood out for my analytical abilities and innovative thinking. Within my first year, I was promoted to senior analyst, and that's when I met Alexander Reynolds, the chief operating officer and the CEO's son. Our relationship began professionally. We worked together on a project to streamline hospital management systems. Alexander was different from what you'd expect of a CEO's son. He wasn't entitled or arrogant. He was hardworking, humble, and genuinely passionate about the company's mission to improve healthcare technology. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship and then romance. We tried to keep it quiet at first, but in a company of 200 employees, news spread quickly. When Harold Reynolds, the CEO and founder, learned about our relationship, he called me into his office for what I expected would be an uncomfortable conversation. "So you and my son Harold," said, leaning back in his leather chair, his steely gray eyes evaluating me. "I hope you understand this changes things." Harold was an imposing figure, tall, always impeccably dressed, with a reputation for being brilliant but unforgiving of mistakes. He had built Reynolds Technology from the ground up 30 years ago and ran it like his personal kingdom. "I understand your concern, Mr. Reynolds," I replied, "but I want to assure you that our relationship won't affect our professional responsibilities." "That's exactly what I'm worried about," he said. "Alexander is too soft sometimes. I need to know you won't use your relationship to influence company decisions or expect special treatment." It was clear from that moment that I would have to work twice as hard to prove myself. When Alexander and I got engaged 6 months later, the scrutiny only intensified. Every decision I made, every project I led, every success I achieved was met with whispers that I'd gotten there because of who I was marrying. After our wedding, it became even more complicated. Family dinners with the Reynolds clan often turned into business discussions where I felt I was constantly being tested. Harold's wife Diane was polite but distant. Alexander's sister, Rachel, who worked in marketing, seemed to resent my presence both in the family and the company. Despite these challenges, I put my head down and worked harder than anyone else. I arrived first and left last. I took on the projects nobody wanted. I built relationships with clients who had been ready to walk away. I implemented systems that increased efficiency by 40%. I sacrificed weekends, vacations, and even delayed starting a family with Alexander because I was so committed to proving my worth. My friendship with Grace Taylor, the chief financial officer, and Benjamin Parker, the chief technology officer, became my sanctuary. They were both veteran executives who had been with the company for over 15 years and had earned Harold's respect. They saw my value and became my advocates in meetings where my voice was often overlooked. Harold respects results. Grace advised me over coffee one day. "He's old school. Just keep delivering and eventually he'll have to acknowledge your contributions." And slowly it seemed to be working. By my 3rd year, I had been promoted to Director of Product Development, managing a team of 20 people. Harold occasionally acknowledged my contributions in company meetings. The whispers about nepotism had mostly faded as my track record spoke for itself. That's when I began developing what I called Project Meridian, a revolutionary healthcare data integration platform that could securely connect patient information across different healthcare systems while maintaining strict privacy controls. It was ambitious, but if successful, it would solve one of the biggest challenges in healthcare technology and potentially generate millions in revenue for Reynolds Tech. For 2 years, I researched, planned, and refined the concept. I studied competing technologies, consulted with healthcare professionals, and worked closely with our legal team to ensure compliance with all healthcare regulations. I stayed up countless nights, working on the proposal, the market analysis, the technical specifications. Alexander would often find me asleep at my home office desk, surrounded by notes and research papers. "You need to take care of yourself, Lana," he would say, gently waking me to come to bed. "The project will still be there tomorrow." But I was driven by something more than professional ambition. This project was my chance to finally prove to Harold, and perhaps to myself, that I truly deserved my position. It wasn't just a project, it was my vindication. When I finally presented the initial concept to the executive team, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Benjamin, our CTO, called it potentially the most significant innovation in the company's history. Grace ran the numbers and projected it could increase our annual revenue by 30% within 2 years. Even Harold seemed impressed, though he was careful not to show too much enthusiasm. "It's promising," was all he said, but coming from him that was high praise. For the next 6 months, I refined the proposal with my team, addressing every possible question or concern before the final presentation to the board. The project would require a significant investment, $5 million in development costs over 18 months, but the potential return was enormous. Everything was falling into place. I felt that finally, after 5 years of grueling work, I was on the verge of achieving something that would cement my place in the company based solely on my own merit. No one could say I got this opportunity because I was a Reynolds by marriage. This was all me. My idea, my research, my planning, my execution. Alexander was proud, but also concerned about the toll it was taking on our personal life. We rarely saw each other outside of work, and when we did, I was often distracted, my mind still solving problems related to Project Meridian. "When this is approved, I promised him we'll take that trip to Italy we've been talking about. 2 weeks, no laptops, no phones." I was so confident, so hopeful, so completely unprepared for what would happen next. The arrival of Amber Wilson coincided with the final stages of Project Meridian's development. She was 23, fresh out of business school with limited practical experience but an abundance of confidence. On her first day, Harold personally introduced her to the executive team, an unusual gesture for an intern. "Amber is the daughter of my old friend Jack Wilson from Wilson Investments," Harold explained. "She'll be with us for 6 months to learn the ropes of the technology business." What he didn't mention then, but what everyone soon discovered, was that Wilson Investments was considering a major stake in our company. Jack Wilson was one of the most successful venture capitalists in the country, with billions at his disposal and connections throughout the industry. I didn't think much of it initially. We had interns regularly, and part of my job was to help them understand our product development process. I welcomed Amber to the team and assigned her to shadow different team members to learn about our workflows. "Thank you for the opportunity, Director Reynolds," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though I hope I'll be doing more than just shadowing. I have some ideas I'd like to contribute." Her confidence bordered on presumption, but I appreciated ambition. "Of course," I replied. "Once you understand our processes, we'd love to hear your ideas." Within days, however, I noticed something unusual. Harold was inviting Amber to executive meetings that even senior managers weren't typically part of. During one product strategy session, Amber sat quietly taking notes, but her presence was conspicuous. After the meeting, I asked Grace about it. "Is it normal for interns to attend executive strategy sessions?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "It is if their father is considering investing $20 million in the company." She lowered her voice. "Be careful with what you share around her, Lana. Harold's been struggling to secure additional funding for expansion. Wilson Investments could solve a lot of problems." The warning bell rang louder a week later when I found Amber at my desk one morning using my computer. "Oh, sorry," she said, looking startled, but not particularly embarrassed. "Jessica said you were in a meeting, and I needed to print something urgently." My assistant Jessica confirmed she had given Amber permission, seeing no harm in it, but something felt off. My project files were password protected, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That afternoon in the break room, I overheard Amber talking to Rachel, my sister-in-law. "Your father mentioned an interesting healthcare data project," Amber was saying. "It sounds fascinating." Rachel's response made my blood run cold. "Oh, you mean Meridian? That's Lana's baby. She's been working on it forever." "He showed me some of the preliminary materials," Amber replied. "I have some thoughts on how it could be improved." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Why was Harold sharing my project materials with an intern? I confronted him that same day in his office. "Amber mentioned you showed her some Meridian materials," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Harold waved dismissively. "Just the general concept. Jack Wilson has connections in healthcare that could be valuable for the project." I wanted Amber's perspective on how her father might view it. It sounded reasonable enough, but the knot in my stomach tightened. That evening I shared my concerns with Alexander. "Your father is sharing confidential project information with an intern," I said. "Doesn't that seem inappropriate?" Alexander sighed, looking uncomfortable. "Dad's really eager to get Wilson Investments on board. Their backing would allow us to expand internationally. Try not to take it personally, Lana." "Not take it personally. This is my project, Alexander. 5 years of work. And it still is," he assured me, squeezing my hand. "Dad's just playing the game. You know how he is." But over the next few weeks, the game became more concerning. Amber began showing up at all of my team meetings. She started offering suggestions that strangely mirrored discussions I'd had privately with my team days earlier. Once I caught her reviewing Project Meridian files on an unlocked company computer. When I mentioned these incidents to Harold, his response was always the same: "Team player Lana. We need to be team players right now." Benjamin noticed my growing unease. "Harold's been having private meetings with Amber almost daily," he told me one evening, as we worked late. "I'm not sure what they're discussing, but it often runs for hours." "Do you think I'm being paranoid?" I asked him. Benjamin's expression was grim. "In this industry, there's no such thing as paranoid, just underprepared." Grace's warning came next. "I've reviewed the latest projections for Meridian," she said, closing my office door behind her. "It's going to be even more profitable than we initially estimated, which makes it very attractive to potential investors." "You think Harold is considering giving Wilson Investments control over Meridian?" I asked. "I think Grace said carefully that you should make sure your name is firmly attached to every aspect of this project. Document everything. Email trails, meeting minutes, development notes. Everything." I took her advice seriously, spending a weekend creating a comprehensive record of my involvement with Project Meridian from inception to the present day. I didn't want to believe that Harold would sideline me from my own project, but the evidence was mounting that something wasn't right. The final warning came from an unexpected source. Diane, Harold's wife, and Alexander's mother, during a family dinner. "Lana, dear," she said quietly, while the others were engaged in conversation, "Harold speaks very highly of your project. But be careful. My husband values loyalty to the company above all else, even family." I looked at her, surprised by the candid warning. "What are you suggesting?" She patted my hand. "Just protect yourself, that's all I'm saying." As the final presentation to the board approached, the atmosphere at work became increasingly tense. Amber was now attending all executive meetings and had somehow gained access to the complete Meridian files. Team members reported to me that she was asking detailed questions about aspects of the project that only someone deeply familiar with it would know to ask. I was no longer just uneasy. I was afraid. My suspicions were confirmed on a Monday morning when I arrived early to finalize some projections for Project Meridian. Out of habit, I checked the file access logs, a precaution Grace had suggested, and discovered something alarming. My main project folder had been accessed at 11:30 the previous night from a company laptop assigned to Amber. I immediately called our IT director, Rachel Davis. Rachel, I need to know if files from my Project Meridian folder were copied to another drive last night, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. After some checking, Rachel confirmed my fears. Yes, several files were copied to an external drive around 11:45 last night. The user was logged in as Amber Wilson. My heart sank. This wasn't just casual interest or information gathering for her father. This was deliberate. I decided to address it directly in our weekly product development meeting. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly brought up the issue of project security. I've noticed some unusual access to the Meridian files, I said, making eye contact with each person around the table, including Amber. I want to remind everyone that this project is confidential and proprietary. Access should be limited to authorized team members only. Amber shifted in her seat but maintained a neutral expression. After the meeting, she approached me. Director Reynolds, I feel like that comment was directed at me, she said, her tone professionally indignant. If you have concerns about my access to project files, perhaps we should discuss it privately. I'd be happy to, I replied. Why don't you explain why you accessed and copied project files late last night? Her composure slipped momentarily. Mr. Reynolds asked me to review some materials and provide feedback. I was just following his instructions. And did his instructions include copying confidential files to an external drive? I needed to review them at home, she said defensively. I'm trying to be thorough in my analysis. Before I could respond, Harold appeared in the doorway. Is everything all right here? He asked, his gaze shifting between us. We were just discussing project security protocols, I said. Harold frowned. Lana, could I see you in my office? In his office, Harold didn't invite me to sit down. A bad sign. What's this I hear about you confronting Amber? She accessed confidential project files without authorization and copied them to an external drive, I explained. That's a violation of our security protocols and potentially our intellectual property protections. Harold's expression darkened. I authorized her access. Amber is helping me evaluate the project from an investment perspective. With all due respect, sir, that's not standard procedure. As the project lead, as the CEO, he interrupted, I determine what's standard procedure. Amber has valuable insights from her father's experience in similar investments. We need to be team players right now, Lana. There it was again. Team players. I took a deep breath. I understand the importance of securing investment, but this project represents 5 years of my work. I'm concerned about your work. Harold's eyebrows shot up. Let me remind you that everything developed here belongs to Reynolds Technology Solutions. We're all working toward the same goal, company success. It was a clear message. The company came first, my contribution was secondary, and I needed to fall in line. I left his office feeling dismissed and devalued. That evening, I expressed my frustration to Alexander. Your father basically told me that my contribution to Meridian is irrelevant, that it belongs to the company so it doesn't matter who gets credit. Alexander looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to his father and to me. Dad can be harsh, but he's under a lot of pressure to secure this investment. Once the deal is done, things will go back to normal. Will they? I challenged. Or will this set a precedent that my work can be co-opted whenever it's convenient? What do you want me to do? Lana, Alexander asked, exasperated. He's my father and the CEO. And I'm your wife, I said quietly. I would hope that counts for something too. The next day, I discovered Amber presenting one of my innovative approaches to data encryption in a meeting with the development team, as if it were her own idea. Several team members glanced at me, uncomfortably aware that they had seen the same presentation from me weeks earlier. After the meeting, my lead developer, Thomas Wright, approached me. That was your encryption solution she just presented. word for word in some parts. I know I said, struggling to maintain my professional demeanor. Are you going to say something? He asked. I already have, I replied. It didn't make a difference. The situation deteriorated further when I learned from Grace that information about Project Meridian had somehow reached one of our competitors. They're suddenly pursuing a similar approach, Grace told me privately. The timing is suspicious. Have you considered that Amber might be sharing information outside the company? I hadn't, but it was a disturbing possibility. Jack Wilson's investment firm had connections throughout the industry, including with our competitors. What if this was never about investment, but about gaining access to our intellectual property? I scheduled another meeting with Harold, determined to make him understand the risks. This time, I brought documentation, access logs, file timestamps, meeting notes, where Amber had presented my ideas as her own. Harold barely glanced at the evidence. Lana, I think you're being territorial. Innovation is a collaborative process. Amber has added valuable perspectives to the project. What perspectives? I challenged. Every idea she's presented originated with me or my team. Harold's expression hardened. Perhaps it would be best if you focused on other projects for now. Let Amber take the lead on finalizing Meridian for the board presentation. I stared at him in disbelief. You're removing me from my own project? I'm optimizing team resources, he corrected. Your expertise could be valuable on our hospital management system upgrade. It was a demotion in all but name, shifting me from our flagship innovation project to a routine system upgrade. I left the meeting in a daze, unable to believe what was happening. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, colleagues were stopping by my office with sympathetic glances or awkward attempts at consolation. Benjamin and Grace were furious on my behalf. This is completely unprofessional, Benjamin fumed. He's throwing away 5 years of your expertise to impress a potential investor. Grace was more practical. Do you have copies of all your work? All your notes, research, everything? I nodded. I've documented everything. Good, she said grimly, because I think you're going to need it. That night I stayed late, making one final effort to salvage the situation. I refined my presentation for the board, incorporating all the latest data and addressing every potential question. I was determined to make a final stand to show the board the true value of what I had created, with or without Harold's support. As I was leaving close to midnight, I saw the light on in Harold's office. Through the glass partition, I could see him and Amber, heads bent over what looked like my presentation materials. They were laughing. I had never felt more betrayed or more resolved about what I needed to do next. The board presentation was scheduled for Thursday at 10 in the morning. I had prepared, meticulously rehearsing my delivery, anticipating questions, ensuring every slide was perfect. I arrived at 7:30, wanting to set up early and calm my nerves with the final review. The conference room was dark when I arrived, which was unusual. Typically, the administrative staff would have prepared it for such an important meeting. I turned on the lights and found a note on the table. Board meeting moved to 8:30 a.m. Executive conference room. My stomach dropped. The meeting had been rescheduled an hour and a half earlier, and no one had informed me. I rushed to the executive conference room on the top floor, my heart pounding. Through the glass doors, I could see the board meeting in full swing. Harold was standing, gesturing toward a slide that looked eerily familiar. Beside him stood Amber, poised and confident in a crisp navy suit. Around the table sat our 7 board members along with Grace, Benjamin, and Alexander. I entered quietly, trying not to disrupt the presentation. Harold barely acknowledged me with a glance before continuing. As you can see from these projections, he was saying the potential market reach for Project Meridian extends beyond our current healthcare clients into adjacent sectors. It was my slide, my analysis, my words, almost verbatim from the presentation I had prepared. I slipped into an empty chair beside Benjamin, who gave me a grim look. They moved the meeting up, he whispered. I only found out 20 minutes ago myself. For the next 45 minutes, I watched in stunned silence as Amber presented my work as if it were her own. My research, my innovations, my projections, all delivered in her voice with occasional supportive comments from Harold. She had clearly been coached well, answering questions confidently and taking credit for solutions I had spent years developing. The board members were impressed, nodding appreciatively at the comprehensive analysis and innovative approach. One of them, Victoria Sinclair, even commented, "This is the most impressive project proposal I've seen in years. Remarkable work for someone so new to the company." Harold beamed proudly. "Amber has brought a fresh perspective that has truly elevated this project. Her insights have been invaluable." I felt physically ill, my hands shaking under the table. 5 years of my life, countless late nights, sacrificed weekends, delayed personal plans, all being attributed to someone who had been with the company for less than 2 months. When the presentation concluded, Harold stood again, addressing the board with a gravity that suggested an important announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, based on the exceptional work you've seen today, I would like to formally recommend Amber Wilson as the project lead for Meridian moving forward." The room erupted in applause. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. Additionally, Harold continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Wilson Investments has agreed to provide $20 million in funding for this project, and future expansions contingent upon Amber's leadership role." So there it was, the true motivation laid bare. My project had been sacrificed as part of a business deal. I was simply collateral damage. The board voted unanimously to approve both the project and Amber's leadership. As the meeting broke up, board members congratulated her, shaking her hand and praising her innovative thinking. No one seemed to notice or care that I was even in the room. Finally, Victoria Sinclair approached me. "Lana, I understand you did some preliminary work on this project as well. It must be gratifying to see it moving forward." Before I could respond, Harold intervened smoothly. "Lana has been an important team member. She'll be transitioning to our hospital management system upgrade now that Meridian is in capable hands." Of course, Victoria nodded already, turning back to Amber. "The fresh perspective is exactly what was needed. Sometimes we need young talent to see possibilities that more experienced staff might miss." Harold guided me away from the group, his hand firmly on my elbow. "A word in my office, Lana." Once the door closed behind us, his demeanor changed from congenial to coldly pragmatic. "I know you're upset, but this decision is best for the company. Wilson's investment is contingent on Amber leading the project." "So you sold my work to secure funding," I said flatly. "I made a strategic business decision," he countered. "Amber brings connections and a perspective that you don't have." "What perspective?" Every idea in that presentation was mine. Harold sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. "Amber has her father's business acumen. She understands what will appeal to investors like him." "And what about what appeals to our clients, the healthcare providers who will actually use this system?" "That's where your contribution was valuable, and it's still included. But moving forward, we need someone who can bridge the technical and investment worlds." I stared at him in disbelief. "You mean someone with the right last name? This isn't about business acumen. It's about connections and nepotism." Harold's expression hardened. "Be careful, Lana. You, of all people, shouldn't throw around accusations of nepotism." The implication was clear. He still saw me as someone who had married into opportunity rather than earned it. "I've worked for this company for 6 years," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed anger. 5 of those years were spent developing Meridian. I've generated millions in revenue, secured dozens of client contracts, and built a reputation for innovation in this industry. And you just erased all of that to impress your friend's daughter." "You're being emotional," Harold dismissed. "Take some time to cool off. Then report to Michael about the hospital system upgrade on Monday." As I turned to leave, I saw Alexander standing in the doorway. He had obviously heard our conversation, but said nothing. His silence was the final betrayal. I walked past him without a word, returned to my office and closed the door. Through the glass I could see staff gathering in clusters, whispering and glancing in my direction. News traveled fast. In a few hours, everyone would know that Lana Reynolds, who had dedicated 5 years to Project Meridian had been replaced by an intern with the right connections. The humiliation was complete. But as I sat at my desk surrounded by evidence of my work and accomplishments, something shifted inside me. The shock and hurt began to crystallize into resolve. I had spent years trying to prove my worth to a man who would never acknowledge it. I had compromised my own well-being and personal life for a company that saw me as dispensable. It was time to stop playing a game rigged against me. I didn't cry when I got home that evening. I didn't scream or break things. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at my kitchen table, and called the one person who had mentored me before I joined Reynolds Technology, my former boss, Elaine Crawford. "They stole your project." Elaine's voice was incredulous after I explained the situation. "And your husband just stood there and let it happen?" "He's caught between his father and me," I said, though the justification sounded hollow even to my own ears. "No, Lana," Elaine said firmly. "He's a grown man who made a choice, and he chose wrong." Her words were painful, but clarifying. Alexander had indeed made a choice, and it wasn't me. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "That depends," she replied. "What do you want? To fight for recognition at a company that clearly doesn't value you, or to take your talents somewhere? They'll be appreciated." The question lingered with me after we hung up. What did I want for so long? My ambitions had been tied to success at Reynolds Technology. I had defined my worth by Harold's approval and my position in the company hierarchy, but that framework had failed me. I spent the weekend taking stock of my situation professionally and personally. I reviewed my employment contract carefully, particularly the non-compete and confidentiality clauses. The contract prevented me from working for direct competitors for 1 year after leaving, but it didn't prevent me from working in healthcare technology broadly. It also specified that while project work belonged to the company, my expertise and general knowledge were my own. I then reviewed my accomplishments, the clients I had brought in, the problems I had solved, the innovations I had created. I compiled a portfolio that demonstrated my capabilities without including proprietary Reynolds technology. If I were to start fresh somewhere else, I needed to be clear about what I could legitimately offer. The personal stock-taking was more difficult. Alexander had called repeatedly throughout the weekend, but I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. His silence in that boardroom had spoken volumes. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. I would resign from Reynolds Technology Solutions. I wouldn't fight a losing battle for recognition or attempt to undermine Amber's position. I would simply walk away with my dignity intact and build something new. I spent hours crafting my resignation letter. It wasn't angry or accusatory. Instead, it was factual and professional, detailing my contributions to the company over 6 years and expressing gratitude for the opportunities I had been given. I attached a comprehensive transition document to ensure that my current projects and client relationships wouldn't suffer in my absence. Then I added something else, a detailed analysis of Project Meridian, including documentation of my role in its development and concerns about the current implementation plan. It wasn't spiteful, it was thorough and aimed at ensuring the project's success even without my involvement. If Harold truly cared about the company as much as he claimed, he would want that information. Monday morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else placed the resignation letter on Harold's desk and began clearing out my personal items. I worked quietly and methodically, backing up personal files and ensuring all company materials remained accessible for whoever would take over my projects. Grace found me first. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching me pack a box of books. "I'm resigning," I said simply. She nodded slowly. "I can't say I'm surprised. What happened was inexcusable. I've left Harold a detailed transition plan. I don't want my clients to suffer." Grace leaned against the doorframe. "And what about you? What will you do?" I smiled for what felt like the first time in days. "I'm not sure yet. But I know what I won't do. Continue to work somewhere that doesn't value my contribution." By mid-morning, word had spread. Colleagues stopped by to express their shock and support. Many seemed genuinely dismayed by my departure. Thomas Wright, my lead developer, was particularly upset. "This team won't be the same without you," he said. "I'm not sure I want to continue with Meridian under these circumstances." "Don't make any hasty decisions," I advised him. "The project is still valuable even if the leadership has changed." Around 11, Alexander finally appeared at my door. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually crisp shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Without talking to me first, I set down the picture frame I was wrapping. "I tried to talk to you, Alexander. For weeks, I told you what was happening. You chose not to listen. You chose not to act. It's complicated, Lana. My father made a business decision. I finished for him. And so am I." He ran a hand through his hair, distressed. "What about us? Are you making a decision about our marriage too?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. I had been so focused on the professional betrayal that I hadn't fully processed what it meant for our relationship. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That depends on you. I won't be the only one fighting for this marriage, and I won't be married to someone who doesn't stand up for me." "You're asking me to choose between you and my family, the company that's been part of my life since birth." "No," I corrected him. "I'm asking you to choose what's right. What happened wasn't just unfair to me. It was unethical business practice. If you can't see that, then, yes, maybe I am asking you to make a choice." Before he could respond, Harold appeared in the doorway, my resignation letter in his hand, his face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving the letter. "I believe the letter is self-explanatory," I replied calmly. "I'm resigning effective immediately." Harold looked between Alexander and me, seeming to realize he had interrupted a tense conversation. "Alexander, give us a moment." To my surprise, Alexander stood his ground. "No, Dad. Whatever you have to say to Lana, you can say in front of me." Harold's eyebrows rose at the unexpected defiance, but he continued. "This is completely unprofessional. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities. What about the hospital system upgrade? What about your team?" "I've provided a comprehensive transition plan," I said, gesturing to the attachment to my letter. "All my projects are documented and ready for handover. As for unprofessional behavior, I believe that ship has sailed, but not on my part." Harold's face darkened. "Is this about Meridian?" "For God's sake, Lana, it's business. Sometimes tough decisions have to be made for the greater good of the company." "Exactly," I agreed. "And I've made a tough decision for my greater good." "What about our family?" Harold hissed, glancing at Alexander. "Have you thought about what this means for my son? For the family dynamics? You're being selfish." I had expected anger, perhaps even attempts to intimidate me into staying, but the accusation of selfishness caught me off guard. After years of putting the company first, of sacrificing my time and well-being, of accepting less recognition than I deserved, to be called selfish was breathtaking in its audacity. I laughed, a genuine if somewhat bitter laugh. "Selfish? I've given this company 6 years of my life. I've missed holidays postponed, starting a family, worked through weekends and illnesses. I created a project that could transform healthcare data management and potentially save lives. And when it was ready to launch, you gave it to someone else because her father might invest in the company. And I'm the selfish one." Harold seemed taken aback by my directness. "You're making this personal when it's business." "It became personal when you chose to humiliate your son's wife in front of the entire board," I replied. "It became personal when you undermined years of my work to curry favor with an investor. Don't pretend this was just business. This was about power and control, and showing me my place." "That's absurd," Harold sputtered. "I've always treated you fairly." "No, you've always treated me as Alexander's wife first and a professional second. You never fully accepted that I earned my position here." Alexander stepped forward. "She's right, Dad. You've held Lana to a different standard than everyone else. What happened with Meridian was wrong, and you know it." Harold looked genuinely shocked at his son's intervention. I did what was necessary for the company's growth. The Wilson investment is critical for our expansion plans. At what cost? I asked quietly. Your integrity, the trust of your employees, your relationship with your family. Don't be dramatic, Lana. No one is irreplaceable. I smiled at that. You might be right. I guess we'll find out. I picked up my box of belongings and turned to leave. Harold blocked the doorway. Think carefully about what you're doing, he warned. If you walk away now, there's no coming back. I looked him directly in the eyes. I don't want to come back. Congratulations on your decision, Harold. I truly hope it was worth it. And with that, I walked past him, head held high, smiling politely at the staff who had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the raised voices. I didn't look back to see Harold's expression or Alexander's reaction. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I was making a decision solely for myself, and it felt surprisingly liberating. As I reached the elevator, Grace appeared beside me, slipping a business card into my pocket. When you're ready, she whispered, call this number. Someone is very interested in your expertise. I nodded, grateful for the gesture, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the office that had been my professional home for 6 years. I felt a momentary pang of sadness, not for the job I was leaving, but for the years I had spent seeking validation from someone who would never truly give it. The doors closed and I took a deep breath. It was time for a new chapter. I expected to feel anxious after leaving Reynolds Technology, but instead, I experienced an overwhelming sense of relief. That evening, I turned off my phone, opened a bottle of expensive champagne I had been saving for Meridian's approval, and toasted to my freedom. The next morning, I awoke to 37 missed calls and over 50 text messages. Most were from Alexander, growing increasingly frantic. Several were from Grace Benjamin and other colleagues. 3 were from Harold himself. I listened to his voicemail, first curious about what he would say. Lana, this is Harold. Your abrupt resignation has created significant problems. The hospital system clients are asking for you specifically. Call me immediately to discuss a transition plan. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just concern about the business impact. Typical Harold. The second message, left several hours later, had a slightly different tone. Lana, Harold again. I may have been hasty yesterday. Perhaps we can discuss a compromise. Call me. The third, left close to midnight, was surprisingly conciliatory. Lana, we need to talk. There may be a way to involve you in Meridian again. Wilson is open to a co-leadership arrangement. Call me first thing. I deleted all 3 without responding. If Harold thought he could manipulate me back with vague promises after what he had done, he had severely misjudged the situation. Alexander's messages were more personal and increasingly desperate. The final one, sent at 2 a.m, simply said, "Please come home. We need to talk. I love you." I did love Alexander despite everything, but I wasn't ready to see him yet. I texted back, "Staying at a hotel. Need time to think. We'll contact you when I'm ready." I spent the day updating my resume and reaching out to professional contacts. By afternoon, I had scheduled 3 interviews for the following week. The healthcare technology sector was booming, and my experience was in high demand. Around 4, my phone rang with Grace's number. I hesitated before answering. "How are things at the office?" I asked, bypassing pleasantries. Grace's laugh was humorless. "Chaotic. Your resignation has caused quite the stir. 2 of your team leads have also resigned. Thomas Wright and Sarah Chen both submitted their notices this morning. I hadn't expected that. They shouldn't have done that on my account." "It wasn't just for you," Grace explained. "They were already frustrated with the direction things were going. Your situation was the last straw." "What about Meridian?" "That's the best part," Grace said, lowering her voice. "Amber is completely out of her depth. She presented at the client meeting this morning and couldn't answer basic questions about implementation. The Memorial Hospital Group is threatening to pull out unless you're brought back to lead the project." I felt a twinge of satisfaction, but tamped it down. That's not my problem anymore. "It gets better," Grace continued. Wilson Investments is having second thoughts. Apparently, Jack Wilson is concerned about the internal instability and the client reaction. Harold must be beside himself, I observed. He's called 3 emergency board meetings since yesterday. Victoria Sinclair actually asked him directly if he had pushed you out because of nepotism toward Amber. He denied it, of course, but the seed of doubt has been planted. I thanked Grace for the update, but asked her not to share any more inside information. I don't want you compromising your position there. This is between Harold and me. The entire executive team is discussing voting to remove him, Grace revealed, ignoring my request. Benjamin is leading the charge. Harold's handling of Meridian and your resignation has raised serious questions about his judgment. That news shocked me. Harold had founded the company. He was its heart and soul. The idea that the board might remove him seemed unimaginable. Over the next few days, the situation apparently deteriorated further. Alexander reported that 4 more staff members had resigned, including key developers from the Meridian team. 3 major clients had put their contracts on hold, pending clarification of the project leadership. The company's stock price had dropped 15% on rumors of internal turmoil. Harold finally resorted to having his assistant call to schedule a lunch meeting. I agreed to meet him, not out of any desire for reconciliation, but to achieve closure. We met at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant midway between my hotel and the office. Harold arrived first, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. The confident, commanding CEO had been replaced by an anxious, sleep-deprived version of himself. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, surprisingly humble. "I realize I've made a serious misjudgment." "Which one?" I asked, coolly. "Taking my project, giving it to Amber, or assuming I'd just accept it?" Harold winced. "All of the above. The situation has evolved since your departure." "So I've heard." "Wilson has withdrawn his investment offer," Harold admitted. "Several key clients are threatening to leave. The board is questioning my leadership." "That sounds like a business problem," I said, using his own words against him. "Not a personal one." Harold's jaw tightened momentarily before he composed himself. "I deserve that. But Lana, the company needs you. Project Meridian needs you. We're prepared to offer you complete leadership of the project, a substantial raise, and a position on the executive committee." I stirred my coffee slowly, considering his offer. A week ago, it would have seemed like a dream come true. Now it felt like too little too late. "Where's Amber in this plan?" I asked. "She's returning to Wilson Investments," Harold said. "It's clear she wasn't ready for the role." "And yet you chose her over me." Harold had the grace to look ashamed. "I was trying to secure the company's future. I made a mistake in how I handled it." "A mistake," I repeated. "Harold, you didn't accidentally send the wrong email or forget an important meeting. You deliberately took a project I spent years developing and gave it to someone else because of who her father was. You humiliated me, professionally and personally. That's not a mistake. It's a character revelation." "I'm trying to make it right," he insisted. "Name your terms." I set down my coffee cup. "I don't have terms. I'm not coming back." Harold's face flushed. "Is this about money? Status? What do you want?" "Respect," I said simply. "And I've learned I'll never truly have that at Reynolds Technology, not while you're in charge." "This is about revenge then," Harold accused. "You want to see me suffer." I shook my head. "This is about self-respect. I've spent years trying to prove myself to you and nothing was ever enough. I'm done trying." "And what about Alexander?" Harold's tone changed, becoming manipulative. "Have you considered what your decision means for him? For your marriage?" "Alexander is an adult who can make his own choices," I replied, "just like I have." As if on cue, Alexander appeared at our table. He had obviously been waiting nearby, part of a coordinated effort to persuade me. "Lana," he said, looking relieved to see me. "Thank you for coming." I glanced between father and son. "Did you plan this ambush together?" Alexander had the decency to look embarrassed. "I asked Dad to try to make things right. The company is falling apart without you." "And that's my responsibility," How exactly? Alexander sat down beside me. It's not your responsibility, but it is an opportunity. Everything you wanted, project leadership, executive status, board consideration, it's all on the table now. I studied my husband's face. He truly believed he was offering me a victory, that this was making amends. He didn't understand that the damage went far deeper than titles or recognition. Alexander, I said gently, even if I got everything you just mentioned, I'd still be working for a CEO who fundamentally doesn't respect me and a company culture that allowed what happened to occur in the first place. People make mistakes, Alexander argued. Dad admits he was wrong. Isn't that enough? He's admitting it because there are consequences now, I pointed out, not because he actually believes it was wrong. There's a difference. Harold interjected. What can I say to convince you? Nothing, I replied honestly. Some bridges can't be unburned. I stood up, gathering my purse. I wish Reynolds Technology success. I truly do. The work is important, and there are good people there who deserve leadership they can trust. But that's no longer my concern. Where will you go? Alexander asked, looking lost. I have several options, I said. I received 3 job offers yesterday. Apparently my reputation in the industry extends beyond Reynolds Technology. Harold's expression darkened. Remember your non-compete clause. I smiled. I've reviewed it carefully with a lawyer. None of these opportunities violate those terms. You'll be receiving a formal communication from my attorney to that effect. As I turned to leave, Alexander caught my hand. And us? What about our marriage? I looked at my husband. A man I still loved but who had failed me when I needed him most. That's a separate conversation. One we should have privately. Harold stood as well. Lana, please reconsider. The board meeting is tomorrow. They're voting on my leadership. If you came back, announced a new role. I'm not your solution, Harold, I interrupted. I was never your problem either. You need to fix the company culture you've created, not just manage the current crisis. With that, I walked away, leaving both Reynolds' men staring after me. It wasn't until I reached my car that I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened and what I had just done. I had walked away from a prestigious position, potentially my marriage and the security I had worked so hard to build. Yet, despite the uncertainty ahead, I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I had valued myself more than someone else's approval. That alone felt like victory. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued. Reynolds Technology's stock fell another 20%. The board voted to retain Harold as CEO, but with significantly reduced authority and an independent chairperson to oversee major decisions. Project Meridian was temporarily suspended until new leadership could be established. I accepted a position with Horizon Healthcare Systems, a growing competitor that had been trying to recruit me for years. My role as Chief Innovation Officer came with creative freedom, better compensation, and most importantly, leadership that valued my expertise from day one. Alexander and I entered counseling, attempting to rebuild what had been broken. He eventually made his own difficult choice, resigning from Reynolds Technology to start his own consulting firm. It was the first time he had truly separated himself from his father's influence, and while painful, it was necessary for both his personal growth and our marriage. Harold reached out one final time, 6 months after my departure. Reynolds Technology had stabilized, but was a shadow of its former self. Project Meridian had been completely restructured under new leadership, but was still struggling to gain traction without the original vision. I understand now what I lost, he admitted during a brief phone call. Not just your talent, but the trust of the entire organization. I'm sorry, Lana. Truly. It was the apology I had once desperately wanted, but no longer needed. I had moved beyond needing Harold's validation or approval. My worth was no longer tied to his recognition. I accept your apology, I said, meaning it. I hope you've learned from this. The hard way, Harold replied. But yes. We ended the call, cordially closing that chapter of my professional life for good. The company that had once defined my sense of self was now just a stepping stone in my journey. Important, but no longer defining. 1 year after my resignation from Reynolds Technology Solutions, I found myself in a very different place, both professionally and personally. My role at Horizon Healthcare had evolved into something even more fulfilling than I had anticipated. I was leading a team of 30 developers and analysts creating innovative healthcare solutions similar to what I had envisioned with Project Meridian, but with greater resources and unfettered creative freedom. The transition hadn't been easy. There were days of doubt, moments of grief for what I had lost, and times when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. Leaving a company where I had invested 6 years of my life, potentially jeopardizing my marriage, and stepping into the unknown had been terrifying. But as the dust settled, the clarity that emerged was worth every moment of uncertainty. Reynolds Technology had continued its decline. Without strong leadership and innovation, they had lost market share to more agile competitors, including Horizon. Project Meridian, once poised to revolutionize healthcare data management, had been scaled back significantly and eventually shelved. Harold remained CEO in title, but the board had brought in a president to handle day-to-day operations, effectively diminishing his authority. Amber had long since returned to her father's investment firm, her brief stint in technology development apparently forgotten. Jack Wilson had ultimately invested his $20 million in one of our competitors, adding insult to injury for Harold. Alexander and I had worked through the most difficult period of our marriage. The counseling helped us establish new boundaries and expectations, both within our relationship and with his family. He had found unexpected fulfillment in his consulting business, free from the shadow of his father's expectations. Our relationship was stronger now, built on mutual respect rather than compromise. On the anniversary of my resignation, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Grace Taylor, my former ally at Reynolds Technology. "You look well," she observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Success agrees with you." I smiled. "It's not just success, it's being valued for my contributions. How are things at Reynolds?" Grace sighed. Harold finally stepped down last week. The board appointed Benjamin as interim CEO while they search for a permanent replacement. "That's a positive change," I remarked. Benjamin always had integrity. "His first official act was to resurrect a version of Project Meridian," Grace said with a slight smile. "He mentioned you should have received a consulting offer." I nodded. "I did. I'm considering it." "You should," Grace encouraged. "It would be a full-circle moment, and the company could certainly use your expertise." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you staying?" "For now," she replied. "Someone needs to help rebuild what was broken." Which brings me to the other reason for my visit. She placed an envelope on my desk. "Harold asked me to give you this. He wrote it himself. No corporate communications involvement." I took the envelope cautiously. "Did you read it?" Grace shook her head. "No, but he seemed different when he gave it to me. Humbled, I think is the word." After Grace left, I opened the letter. It was handwritten on Harold's personal stationery. "Dear Lana," it began. "A year ago, I made the worst business decision of my career. Not because of the financial repercussions, though those have been substantial. Not because of the damage to the company's reputation or the loss of key personnel, but because I allowed my ego and outdated notions of loyalty to cloud my judgment. I failed to recognize your true value not just to the company but as a person worthy of respect. I valued connections over competence, appearances over substance. In doing so, I not only lost a brilliant innovator, but damaged my relationship with my son and compromised the integrity of the company I built. There are no excuses for my behavior, only consequences that I continue to face daily. I have stepped down as CEO to make way for leadership that can restore what I damaged. I am writing not to ask forgiveness which I have not earned, but to acknowledge the truth that I was wrong and you were right to stand up for yourself. The lesson has been painful but necessary. I hope that in your new role, you are receiving the recognition and respect you always deserved, but did not receive from me. Sincerely, Harold Reynolds. I set the letter down, surprised by the emotion it evoked. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication, but a quiet sense of closure. Harold had finally seen what I had known all along, that respect cannot be demanded, only earned, and that true leadership means valuing people for their contributions, not their connections. The healing process had been gradual but profound. In the months after leaving Reynolds Technology, I had gone through stages of anger, doubt, and grief before finally reaching acceptance and renewal. I had learned to value myself independently of external validation. I had discovered that sometimes walking away is not a surrender, but an act of self-respect. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not determined by titles, projects, or others' recognition. It was inherent in who I was and the integrity with which I conducted myself. That evening, Alexander and I celebrated the one-year anniversary of what we now called my Liberation Day with dinner at our favorite restaurant. As we raised our glasses in a toast, he asked any regrets. I considered the question seriously, only that I didn't recognize sooner that I deserved better. I spent so many years trying to prove myself to someone who wasn't capable of seeing my value. Alexander nodded. I regret not standing up for you sooner. I was caught between loyalty to my father and to you, and I made the wrong choice initially. But you made the right one, eventually, I reminded him. That's what matters. What will you do about Benjamin's consulting offer, he asked. I smiled. I think I'll accept it, on my terms. It's not about going back. It's about closing the circle with dignity. As we finished our meal, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The painful experience had transformed me in ways I never expected. I was more confident, more discerning about where and with whom I invested my energy, and more committed to creating work environments where everyone's contributions were valued. The greatest lesson wasn't that betrayal hurts, or that standing up for yourself is difficult. It was that true self-worth comes from within and must be protected as fiercely as any external achievement. No title, project, or corporate affiliation can substitute for the fundamental knowledge that you deserve respect. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away with your head held high, knowing that your value doesn't diminish because someone failed to see it. And sometimes the act of valuing yourself inspires others to recognize what they've lost. If you've ever felt undervalued or had your work credited to someone else, I hope my story gives you courage. Remember that no job, relationship, or situation is worth sacrificing your self-respect. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say enough and trust that better opportunities await. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between staying in a comfortable but toxic situation or stepping into the unknown? Leave a comment below and share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself in difficult situations. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we deserve respect. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it.